Final hour of Sports Talk is underway. Welcome back, everybody. Steve Kaplowitz with you live from Twin Peaks here at the Fountains in East El Paso. Going to have some fun in our final hour before we get you ready for high school football Friday night coming up at 7 tonight. Joe Dombrowski is with us right now on our 600 ESPN El Paso Village Inn hotline as we are going to talk a little wrestling with Joe. And I'm excited about having him onto the program for the very first time because of one particular subject that we've never really talked about that we're going to hit on today, the Montreal Screw Job. And if you're a wrestling fan, you know exactly what I'm talking about. First off, Joe, I know you're out in Pittsburgh, PA. Welcome to the program. It's great to have you with us.
It's certainly great to be here, Steve. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate the platform.
You are a play-by-play man for wrestling. You're a ring announcer. You're a producer. You do PR. You do everything when it comes to wrestling. So I'm going to ask you right off the bat. Give me your thoughts and reactions to the 30 for 30 this week with Ric Flair.
Man, there's so much to process, both good and bad, when you look at the life of Ric Flair. Ric is both a tale of triumph and a cautionary tale. He embodied the excess of the 80s and the lifestyle that was so flamboyant and so highly portrayed at that time. And he really embodied not just the culture, but, of course, wrestling specifically. The fact he was able to transcend through the mainstream without the marketing machine of Vince McMahon of the WWF speaks volumes to what he meant. A consummate performer, but also you look in later years, and certainly with his health problems, and you see that sometimes life in the fast lane inevitably is going to catch up with you. And Ric has not had the best past few years, health-wise or financially. And I hope that 30 for 30 will be a life lesson, maybe a little easier learned for this generation of wrestlers than maybe for some in Ric's generation. But I give all the credit to Ric in the world, not just for his contributions for the wrestling industry, but also being so open and honest, or as open and honest as you can expect. There are some things that may not have been so honest. The 10,000 women was a bit of a suspect figure, but I guess he was there, and thankfully I wasn't. But to be honest about the portrayal of some of his issues with his drinking and his infidelities and that type of thing. So hopefully we can respect and appreciate the art and the craft that Ric Flair gave us in his 36-year career, but also be weary of some of his personal choices.
Is he on your Mount Rushmore of professional wrestlers?
I think he is. Ric Flair was if I had heroes growing up in wrestling, it was Ric Flair, it was Bobby the Brain Heenan. I was never a Hulkamaniac. I was never, a Stinger. I respected what they did as I grew up, but as a kid, and even today, Ric Flair to me is without peer. So Ric Flair is without a doubt on my Mount Rushmore, along with probably Hulk Hogan and Stone Cold Steve Austin and maybe somebody like a Lou Thesz or some of the from the Golden Age. But Ric Flair is a given without a doubt.
Folks, if you want to learn more from Joe, you can go to his website, joe-dombrowski.com. That is joe-dombrowski.com. I want to talk about the Montreal Screw Job because as it's approaching the 20-year anniversary, you produced a DVD set on this called The Montreal Theory. Now, before we get to the theory, Joe, why do you think that after all these years, this became one of the greatest controversies, not only in professional wrestling, but really in professional sports and pop culture?
I think it just changed the genre. You can look at November 9th, 1997, Montreal, Canada, for the WWF Survivor Series as a moment where the business of pro wrestling was never, ever the same. It was the end of Bret Hart's 13-year run in the WWF. It was the end of the perception of Vince McMahon as the innocent, naive play-by-play announcer. Whether he intended to or not, he became the evil Mr. McMahon that night in Montreal. The lines were blurred between fantasy and reality. What's real? What isn't? What did we just watch? I need to know more. And people were so glued to their televisions, and those that were fortunate enough to have the internet back in 1997 were glued to their computer screens. It was just captivating. It was real-life drama, played out in a staged wrestling scene, but with more real-life drama coming in on top of that. It was so layered, and it was so real. Even leading up to Montreal, the hatred and the contempt between Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels was a very real situation, no matter what side you look at it. And that had crossed the line a number of times on live television with some of the comments they had made. And I think wrestling fans, no different than if you're watching a movie or if you're watching a great TV show, you want to get lost in the story. You want to believe. You don't want to be watching a movie and have the boom mic fall in the shot and then have the illusion ruined for you. Wrestling fans, even in today's day and age with everything put out there, they want to believe. You just have to give them a reason to. And it was so easy to believe in what happened in the Montreal Screw Job because to this day people debate what was and wasn't real and what was and wasn't supposed to happen and who really disliked who. And people just love to see that drama play out. And to me, as a 12-year-old kid at the time, it still sticks very vividly in my mind when I first saw it, first heard about it. And, of course, it's only grown in its reputation since.
When did you first believe in a conspiracy theory involving this?
The first time I doubted the official story of the Montreal Screw Job was probably around 2006, about 9 years after it happened. And it was talking to Steve Corino. Steve, some listeners may know from Ring of Honor, from ECW. He's currently a trainer now in WWE down in Orlando. But Steve had always thought that it was a con job, that Vince never really screwed Bret. Vince never really forced Bret out of the company. Vince was never really this evil guy that had secretly conspired with Shawn, and Bret was in the dark, and Bret was the victim. Steve always thought that Vince and Bret were in on it together. And the more I thought about it, I dismissed it at the time, but the more I thought about it, the more I started to read into other conspiracy theories in life and pop culture, whether it's JFK down in Dallas, whether it's the moon landing, not that I believe that the moon landing was fixed necessarily, but just reading so many of those conspiracy theories and watching the likes of former Governor Jesse Ventura just ask questions and question our reality got me thinking. And I rewatched Wrestling with Shadows, the A&E documentary about Bret Hart's final months leading up to Montreal. And the more I watched it, the more it just seemed like a propaganda piece for Bret's side of the story. And, I mentioned Governor Ventura. One thing Ventura always says about conspiracies is follow the money. And you look back at that and you see that was a catalyst for the WWF Attitude Era, which made Vince McMahon a billionaire, which made his company record profits. Bret Hart went to WCW and I believe received, it was either $2.7 or $2.9 million guaranteed per year over 3 years, so almost $9 million for a much, much, much easier schedule. Shawn had become the de facto top guy in the company after 2 or 3 years of Shawn and Bret nipping at each other's heels, and had Shawn not gotten hurt a few months later, his run would have been much, much longer. So it just seemed too perfect and too convenient where, okay, everybody hates everybody and everybody's yelling at everybody, but if you think about it, everybody got what they wanted out of the situation where Shawn got to win, Bret didn't really get to lose because he got screwed, and Vince got to restructure his company and get rich, as any businessman will want to. So the more I dug into it, the more questions and coincidences popped up, and I figured whether I'm right or not, we got a story here. We got an interesting side to tell.
And you did more digging, and I know you talked to more wrestlers and people around the business, and I'm sure people probably corroborated on Corino.
Yeah, there were a few different people that I was very surprised to hear. had come out publicly. And one of them is Kevin Nash. I just had a chance to talk to Kevin a couple months ago again in the Carolinas for some big events we were doing down there. And Kevin's big thing was Vince McMahon refused to sell or refused to, acknowledge any weakness from the federal government when he was tried, from Ted Turner when he tried to put him out of business. Vince is, he didn't sell when he tore 2 quads at the same time on live television. But he would sell a punch from Bret, who's leaving the company, and let it be filmed on a documentary. So Kevin and Sean Waltman, X-Pac, have doubted the story publicly. Jerry the King Lawler had doubted the story publicly a time or two. So, and he was ringside, and he had pulled over a big con job when everybody thought him and Andy Kaufman hated each other. So the fact there's doubt in some very intelligent people's minds show me that a lot of people that should be a lot smarter than me also don't have all the answers. And the beauty of the Montreal Theory DVD and MP4 that you touched on earlier is that I don't pretend to have all the answers. I don't tell people what they should think. My platform is I don't know, but I give you two different sides. I give you at least 2 different sides of the story. I come at you from all directions, but I let the viewer make their own decision of what they think happened in reality. Because I don't have a smoking gun or a deathbed confession or anything that is proof beyond a shadow of a doubt, but I have a lot of evidence, both circumstantial and direct, that will make you think. And if I can turn your reality upside down in 2 or 3 hours, then I'm happy to do that, because I think it's important in this world to ask questions and hold people's feet to the fire and hold them accountable, and don't take anything at face value. And obviously that's not an issue of danger in wrestling, but I think it is in our culture where people take people of power at face value, and they end up getting screwed over. And, the article that came out this week on SI.com that interviewed me, the quote was, I think, it's better to be skeptical than screwed. And I think that's a great way to look at life in general, not to be paranoid and not to let it rule your life, but just have people have their feet to the fire and have them be held accountable for what they're going to do. And Montreal Theory was a chance to do that and also have a little bit of fun with it and make people think.
Dan Green's story, by the way, in SI is available right now for you to look at on the 20th anniversary, which profiles our guest, Joe Dombrowski. When your DVD came out, did you ever hear from Vince or from Bret or Sean or anybody else connected? Was there anybody upset with going ahead and accusing those guys of staging the whole thing?
Well, I mean, I don't think upset is the right word, because I'm not looking at this in any way derisive towards Bret and Vince. If Bret and Vince did concoct this, if the most controversial finish in modern-day wrestling history was actually a well-orchestrated plot, I will stand on my feet now. I'll give them a standing ovation, because we all got duped, we all got entertained, and we all got taken on a roller coaster ride of so many emotions. I applaud Bret and Vince if I'm correct, or if the theory is correct. My thing when I was putting it together is a lot of people were afraid to talk, and I was very surprised by that. One individual who was very high profile in the WWF at the time, whose name I won't mention, and is also no stranger to controversy, told me that, quote, they didn't want that kind of heat to talk about it. So that tells me there's still a lot of open wounds about this, and probably a few things that haven't been told yet. The most negative thing I've heard, Bret Hart's ex-wife, Julie, had come out and said that it was the most preposterous thing she'd ever heard, and completely dismissed and discredited the whole thing. Of course, she was promoting her book at the time, so that may have had a little something to do with it. Wink, wink.
Let's put it this way. If the theory ever held true, we'll probably never know. That's the only sad part, Joe. 20 years later, we still don't have any more truth to the matter. They've kind of buried the hatchet, so to speak, Bret and Vince have. And if those guys are in on it from the beginning, that's the greatest that's probably the greatest wrestling storyline that's ever been played out.
I'd agree with you. And short of a deathbed confession or something, melodramatic, I don't think we'll get anything. But, at the end of the day, Bret did come back and do business, which he had sworn for 13 years he would never do. And he did business and made money directly off of Montreal with his match with Vince at WrestleMania that year in 2010. So, again, the circumstantial evidence in the sense that everybody's still making money today. And if there's a conspiracy, if there's a Montreal theory that's true and everybody involved, which I think if there is a conspiracy, it's only Bret and Vince, because if anybody else knew, it would have gotten out by now. I think Shawn probably thought he was screwing Bret. I think Earl probably thought he was screwing Bret, Earl Hebner, the referee. I think everybody around probably thought that, but it wouldn't shock me, after a 13, 14-year relationship, and Vince and Bret had a closed-door meeting or a secret phone call to let each other know what was going on, because there's no way Bret was that naive being in the business his entire life. That's the thing that makes the least sense to me, is you come down there, there's all these rumors, Vince is at ringside watching, but he's not on commentary. Things are different. Things feel different, and Bret's not going to suspect anything, and he's going to let Shawn put Bret in Bret's own hold. That, to me, I don't think Bret's that naive. I think Bret either had knowledge or was complicit, at least, because he knew it would turn himself into the biggest sympathetic hero of all time and eliminate the bad taste of him being the anti-American, pro-Canadian villain that he was all that year. But again, follow the money. They're still making money. They're still putting out DVDs. They're still doing retrospectives. They're still replaying the story, doing the sharpshooter screw job finish as recently as whenever it was, a year or two ago. I think they did it with Natalya and maybe Charlotte Flair or something like that. They did another sharpshooter screw job with Bret at ringside. So it's never going to stop, and they're still going to try to go back to that well. And if they are, and if that was the plan from day one, congratulations, more power to them, because they absolutely pulled it off with perfection.
Follow Joe on Twitter at Joe_Dombrowski, at Joe_Dombrowski, online at Joe-Dombrowski.com, where he's got not only that DVD, but Virgil and other wrestling DVDs available for you as well. And again, that Dan Green story is on SI.com. Joe, terrific job, tremendous work, and thanks so much for sharing some time with us on a Friday here on Sports Talk.
My pleasure. I appreciate you guys having me.
All right. That's Joe Dombrowski, folks.